What if your family wasn't cursed, but chosen? Welcome to a tale buried deep in the heart of rural America, where a forgotten bloodline, an abandoned house, and a ritual lost to time converge. Follow Ethan, a grieving son, as he returns to his ancestral home, only to uncover a horrifying truth that rewrites his identity and warps the fabric of reality. Whispers in the walls, a mirror that lies, and a presence that remembers. Everything you try to forget, this isn't just a haunting, it's a legacy. And the final chapter isn't survival, it's transformation. Turn down the lights, let the story begin. The air on Route 50 was so still it felt like the world was holding its breath. Jake Navarro tapped the wheel of his truck, eyes scanning the endless ribbon of asphalt unfurling through the Nevada desert. The sun had long dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a violet bruise in the sky. As dusk bled into full darkness, only the faint glow of his headlights kept the emptiness at bay. Miles and miles of nothing, except the occasional road sign half buried in dust, or the skeleton of a gas station long since choked by sand. He hadn't passed another soul in over an hour. Jake was used to isolation. Hell, after 10 years of long-haul driving, solitude was practically his co-pilot. But something about tonight was different. It wasn't the silence. He liked silence. It was the sense that something was listening. He turned on the radio, static. Not even a country station to hum along to. Figures, he muttered, adjusting the dial, with no luck. Then he saw it. A glint ahead. A shimmer, like moonlight bouncing off glass. Jake eased his foot off the gas. On the right shoulder, about 100 feet ahead, stood a figure. Not waving, not moving, just standing. Jake's hand hovered over the CB mic. You all right out there?" Nothing but dead air. As he rolled closer, the truck's high beam swept over the figure. A man, mid-50s maybe, tall and gaunt, wearing a sheriff's uniform that looked like it belonged to a different era. His badge was dulled, but the name was still visible. H. Crow. The man raised a hand slowly in greeting, not as if hailing for help, but more like welcoming an old friend. Jake's instinct said drive, but guilt made him ease to a stop anyway. He opened the window. "Need a lift, Sheriff?" The man leaned in, eyes like fogged glass. "I was wondering when you'd show up, Jake." Jake stiffened. "Have we met?" The man just smiled, something ancient curling at the edge of his lips. "We all got debts out here." Jake blinked. "Look, I'm just headed east. I can call someone if..." But the shoulder was empty. The sheriff was gone. Jake twisted around, heart thudding. The highway stretched behind in both directions, abandoned and dark. He rubbed his face. Jesus. Get a grip, Jake. He hit the gas and peeled out, dust trailing like smoke in his mirrors. But for the next 10 miles, every time he blinked, he saw those eyes. A half hour later, he pulled into the first sign of civilization, a weather-beaten diner and gas station combo, the kind that seemed trapped in 1973. A flickering neon sign buzzed the words, "Lila's Stop." Jake parked, killing the engine. The desert wind howled against the windshield. Inside the diner was empty, except for an elderly waitress reading a tabloid and an old jukebox softly playing Patsy Cline. The smell of coffee and old grease hung in the air like memory. Jake slid into a booth. The waitress glanced up. "Coffee? Strong as you got." She poured it without a word, her hands trembling slightly. Jake noticed the cross around her neck was on backward. "You all right, ma'am?" She looked at him like he wasn't real. "They said you'd be coming back." Jake frowned. "What?" "You were here last fall, sat right there. You asked about the town that vanished. I've never..." He trailed off. Had he? Before he could ask more, the bell above the door jingled. A teenage girl in a tattered flannel walked in, dragging a duffel bag. Her face was bruised, her eyes hollow. The waitress flinched. "Delia, you shouldn't be here. Not tonight." Delia ignored her, looking at Jake. "You're the driver, right?" He blinked. "Excuse me? They said you'd take me there." Jake's stomach dropped. "Take you where?" She slid a folded paper across the table. It was a map, hand-drawn, showing an off-ramp near Eagle Wash, a stretch of road no longer listed on any official atlas. He pushed it back. "Look, kid, I don't know who you think I am." "You saw him, didn't you?" she asked quietly. "The man on the road." Jake didn't answer. Delia nodded. "Then it's already started." "What started?" "The offering." Her voice was flat, emotionless. The waitress began muttering under her breath, whispering something that sounded like a prayer or a curse. The jukebox crackled, skipping to a warped gospel song. Jake stood up. "I think I've had enough weird for one night." Delia grabbed his wrist, cold, her grip stronger than it should have been. "If you leave now, he'll follow you anyway." Jake yanked free, storming out into the desert night. The wind had stopped. The air was too still now. He climbed into his truck, heart racing, and in his passenger seat sat the sheriff. "Turn around, Jake." Jake didn't scream, but he drove, back the way he came, back to Eagle Wash. Jake didn't remember deciding to drive. One second he was gripping the wheel, knuckles white and breath shallow, and the next he was already halfway down a cracked service road off Route 50, hemmed in by decaying Joshua trees and rock outcrops that looked like broken teeth under the moonlight. The sheriff was no longer in the passenger seat, just the map unfolded neatly across the dashboard, fluttering as if alive. Jake turned on the dome light and stared at the strange markings. The ink looked faded, almost like it had been drawn in blood, diluted with water. There was the highway, yes, but also dozens of handwritten notations. "Don't stop if you hear it. Avoid the mile with the burn sign. Never flash your lights twice in a row." At the center of the map, a crude drawing of a church with no doors. Beneath it, in jagged cursive, Eagle Wash. "He wakes here." Jake cursed under his breath and crumpled the map, but his fingers refused to let go. The headlights caught something in the distance. A sign. "Welcome to Eagle Wash, founded 1886, but the bottom half of the sign was scorched, warped by fire, and black scorch marks spidered across the wood like veins. He drove past it slowly. The town, or what was left of it, came into view like a phantom. 3 buildings still stood, their bones barely holding together. An old gas station, a chapel with a collapsed roof, and a general store with a rusted-out truck sunk halfway into its front porch. All around them, the desert crept inward, swallowing what it could. Jake pulled up and killed the engine. Silence crashed around him. Then he heard it. A faint ringing. Like a bell, but off, hollow, uneven, as if struck by something heavy and wet. He grabbed the flashlight from his glove box and stepped out. The air smelled strange, like copper and wet wood. The sky above seemed darker than it had any right to be, and the stars felt too close, like they were watching. His boots crunched on the gravel as he approached the chapel. It was barely standing, one wall fully collapsed inward, revealing rows of pews draped in tattered fabric. Candles, fresh, burned in a line down the aisle, though no one was there to light them. Jake stepped inside. The temperature dropped. His breath came out in wisps, and he could swear he saw them curling upward like smoke into the rafters. On the far end of the altar, a large wooden cross had been turned upside down, nailed into the ceiling. Underneath it, a circle drawn in salt, and something darker, a ritual space. He stepped closer, and a whisper slid across his ear. "You brought it with you." Jake spun around, light darting across the pews. Nothing. But something had changed. The building was tilting. Walls that should have been straight now slanted suddenly inward, like the chapel was inhaling, closing around him. He backed out quickly, heart pounding, and nearly stumbled over something outside. It was Delia, on her knees in front of the church, fingers stained dark with something thick and red. She looked up at him with glassy eyes. "I tried to warn them," she said softly. "They never listen." Jake looked around wildly. "Where the hell did you come from? You followed me?" Delia didn't answer. Instead, she extended her hand, revealing a small object. A coin. Ancient, discolored, etched with a symbol Jake didn't recognize. 3 lines intersecting in a broken triangle. "He gave this to me," she whispered. said it would make the pain stop. Jake recoiled. Oh, her eyes darted toward the chapel, the one that waits beneath. Jake didn't ask more. He grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the truck. We're getting out of here now. But when they reached the vehicle, the tires were flat, all four, as if sliced from the inside. Shit, Jake muttered, panic blooming. From the direction of the store, a flickering light danced. A lantern. Jake turned. A figure emerged, hunched and draped in what looked like a preacher's robe, but the face beneath the hood was wrong. No eyes, just stretched skin where sockets should be. Its mouth was sewn shut, but the sound, that bell again, emanated from somewhere inside its chest. Delia screamed. The figure didn't run. It glided, covering distance faster than it should. Jake grabbed the crowbar from his cab and swung wildly, shouting heart hammering. But the figure stopped just out of reach, tilting its head like a curious dog. Then it opened its robe. Inside were dozens of keys. Car keys, house keys, diary locks, hundreds, hanging like trophies from hooks in its flesh. The elder whispered, "He collects what opens doors." Jake grabbed her hand and ran. Behind them, the chapel's windows shattered outward, not inward. Something was coming out. They sprinted toward the general store, slamming the door shut behind them. Jake shoved a shelf in front, heart racing. Inside, the dust was thick, but the room was untouched, preserved. Shelves still stocked with canned food, dusty postcards, a register with a cracked screen, and then Jake saw it. On the far wall, behind the counter, a photo, black and white, a group of people standing in front of the same chapel. One of them was the sheriff. Another was a little girl, Delia, younger, smiling. Jake turned to her. "This picture, it's from decades ago." "How the hell?" Delia didn't answer, because she was gone. The store was empty, the shelves were untouched. The dust on the floor showed only one set of footprints. Jake stood frozen in the doorway of the general store, the yellowed photograph still trembling in his hand. The air was dead again, thick, unmoving, silent. He stared at the photo of Delia, her childlike smile far too bright against the backdrop of decay. He spun around. No sign of her, no voice, no breath. Just dust and those same footprints, his footprints. Jake blinked hard, forcing himself to breathe. "This isn't real," he whispered, but the words rang hollow in the stale, ancient air. Something in the store creaked. Not the wood, not the shelves. A deeper sound, like something large shifting its weight underneath the building, like bones scraping stone. Jake backed away slowly, pushing past the counter and ducking into a storage room. A single emergency light flickered above, its battery nearly dead. The room smelled like rot and rainwater. Against the back wall, he found an old landline phone hanging limp like a forgotten limb. With shaking hands, he picked it up. No dial tone, but something was already on the line. "Hello?" Jake whispered. A voice replied, soft, distant, crumbling like dry leaves. "He watches through the glass. He wears your face now." Jake slammed the receiver down, heart hammering. The moment he let go, a mirror, small, cracked, nailed to the inside of the door, caught his reflection. Only it wasn't his face looking back, it was his body. But the eyes were gone, hollow sockets black and endless, the mouth curved upward in a cruel, knowing smile. He turned away, and the mirror shattered on its own. Jake bolted out of the store, kicking through the dust like a man underwater. He ran until he reached the gas station. Half collapsed, rusted signs hanging like wind chimes without a breeze. A faded banner still flapped limply against the awning. $1.99 gas, last stop before the wash. He didn't know what he was looking for. Maybe shelter, maybe answers. But he found the door half open and stepped inside, the bell above jingling weakly, like mocking laughter. Inside, time had stopped. Cigarette ads from the ADS still hung pristine behind the counter. Candy wrappers curled on the racks. A single Polaroid camera sat on the register, pointing toward the entrance. Jake walked up to it, heart pounding in his throat. It clicked by itself. A photo slid out. He waited, breath frozen. When the image appeared, his stomach turned. It was a picture of him, standing exactly where he was now, but behind him, in the doorway, stood Delia, and next to her, a man with no face, just skin stretched tight and featureless. Jake spun around. No one was there. He grabbed the photo and shoved it into his pocket, stumbling toward the back of the store. He found a locked office door, pried it open with the crowbar. Inside was a small dusty desk, papers strewn everywhere, yellowed clippings from the local paper. Town of Eagle Wash evacuated after fire. Local cult activity suspected. Reverend Ellery disappears amid allegation. And then one headline, newer, clip from a modern printout. Truck driver missing on Route 50, last seen near abandoned Eagle Wash. Jake stared at the photo beneath the headline. It was his truck, parked exactly where it had broken down last night. His head spun. Suddenly the air pressure dropped, like the world had inhaled. Behind him, the door creaked. A soft voice. "He doesn't like when you look back." Jake turned slowly. A figure stood in the hallway. Not Delia, someone else. A man in a long coat, face obscured by shadows, holding a leather-bound journal. "I've been waiting for you," the man said, stepping forward. "We all have." Jake backed up against the desk. "Who the hell are you?" The man didn't blink. "They called me Father Ellery. Once." Jake's breath caught. "The one from the papers?" Ellery smiled, but there was no joy in it. "The church was never mine. I only unlocked the door." Jake shook his head. "Door to what?" Ellery opened the journal, flipping through pages of diagrams, rituals, annotations scrawled in red, symbols like the one on the coin Delia showed him. "He lives beneath the wash," Ellery said. "They buried him in salt and bone, in silence and shadow. But memory is a poor prison. Every few decades, someone hears the bell. The ritual must begin again." Jake moved closer. "You're saying this thing, this presence, it's alive?" "No," Ellery whispered. "It's remembered, which is worse." Suddenly, a low rumble shook the building. A deep groan, like a beast waking from hibernation. Ellery grabbed Jake by the collar. "You brought him back when you saw, when you heard. Now you must finish what you started." Before Jake could respond, Ellery shoved the journal into his hands and turned. He walked toward the front of the store. Jake followed, only to find the man gone, vanished. Only a faint smell of burnt wood and iron remained. Jake opened the journal. The last page had one instruction written in block letters: "Do not follow the sound of your own voice." And underneath in red, "If you do, he will find the door." The pages crackled as Jake turned them. Each diagram seemed older than the last. Ink faded, parchment yellowed, some smeared with something darker than water. He traced a circular symbol that matched the one he'd seen on the back of the coin Delia had held. Next to it were 6 names, all crossed out violently. One name was fresh, Jake Navarro. He froze. Outside, the wind had picked up, though no clouds moved across the sky. It howled not through trees but through the gaps in the abandoned shelves, snaking like a voice too old for language. Jake shut the journal. The sound of silence returned, until it didn't. A whisper, but not someone else's, his own, from the back of the store. "Jake." The voice was his, the same low register, the same anxious tremor, but warped. Slower, as if someone were playing a recording dragged through mud. He backed away. The whisper followed. "Jake Navarro." He ran, past the shattered counter, past the photo that was still warm in his pocket, out into the dusty road. The air was thicker now, every breath like swallowing cotton. The sun, still stuck at early morning, cast long shadows that didn't match his shape. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to get away, but away wasn't real anymore. The road was shorter than before. The signpost he passed read, "Welcome to Eagle Wash," on both sides. He was circling. He kept walking until he reached the only place he hadn't dared approach before, the small white chapel just beyond the hill. Its steeple was cracked, the cross bent like an old man's spine. No birds, no wind, no noise. only the low, rhythmic hum, like someone humming a lullaby with no tune. The front doors were unlocked. He stepped inside. It was colder than it had any right to be. Pews warped with time, hymn books rotting on the floor. Candles had long since melted into stalactites of wax along the stained glass windows, and at the far end, under the collapsed altar, a trap door. Old, iron-bound, scratched. Jake moved toward it slowly, the hum growing louder, vibrating in his sternum now. It wasn't a hum anymore. It was breathing. His breathing. He reached down. His hand shook as he touched the rusted handle. The trapdoor opened on its own. A gust of breath escaped from beneath, warm, wet, and sweet, like spoiled milk. Jake gagged. The stairs below were carved from stone, slick and sweating. He descended, step after step. The darkness wasn't total. It pulsed, like veins beneath skin. The air shimmered as if underwater. His foot touched earth at last, and ahead was a narrow corridor lit by candles that didn't burn. They simply glowed, as if remembering what fire used to be. He walked forward, journal in one hand, flashlight in the other. On the walls, names were etched. Dozens, hundreds, all the same family: Navarro, Crane, Winslow, Ellery. Every name paired with a symbol. Some he recognized from the journal. One door on the left was ajar. He pushed it open. Inside was a small room with a mirror nailed to the far wall. Beneath it, a crib. He approached slowly. A sound, soft crying, infantile. But it didn't come from the crib. It came from the mirror. He looked up. The reflection was not the room he stood in. It was the bedroom of a house. His house back home. The nursery. A woman stood in it, holding a baby. His baby. Sophia, Jake gasped. He hadn't seen his daughter since the accident, but she was alive, smiling in the woman's arms. The woman turned. It was Delia. Her eyes were empty. Her voice echoed through the mirror. "She remembers you, Jake, but not for long." Jake reached out, but the mirror cracked, and the reflection splintered into silence. A thunderous boom echoed through the stone chamber. The candles died instantly. Jake stumbled out of the room, nearly dropping the journal. A light flickered at the end of the hall, red and pulsing. He ran toward it. A chamber opened. Inside, 6 stone chairs circled a pit of ash and bone. Chains dangled from the ceiling. At the center, rising from the floor, was a massive stone tablet carved with the same sigil from the coin. Blood glistened on its surface. Jake stepped forward, and the door behind him slammed shut. From the shadows, something moved. Not walked, moved, dragging itself across the floor without limbs. A face emerged from the pit. It was his own. Staring upward, its mouth opened wider than bone should allow, and in his voice it spoke. "You've been here before." Jake fell to his knees. "No, I haven't." The thing in the pit laughed, dry, hoarse, as if exhaling centuries. "You never left." It lunged. Jake blacked out. When he awoke, he was outside the chapel, dust on his lips, blood on his shirt. The journal beside him, a single new line had appeared inside it, handwritten in red. "The first veil is broken, you remain." And beneath that, "You will forget this, but he will not." The chapel behind him burned, but there was no smoke, only ash and a faint voice. His voice, still whispering from somewhere far too close. "Jake, Navarro, come back inside." The dream returned, more vivid this time. Jake stood in the middle of the highway again, shirt soaked in blood that wasn't his, headlights frozen in midair like the world had stalled. In the distance, the thrum of cicadas grew into a chant, then morphed into human whispers repeating his name. "Jacob, Navarro, you turned back when the others crossed. You should have burned." He awoke with a gasp in the cab of his truck. The radio was on again, Static, 3:16 a.m. Jake slammed the dial off, but the hum continued, not from the radio now, but from under the truck. It sounded like murmuring through concrete, dozens of voices clawing just beneath him. He flung open the door and stumbled out into the early dawn, barefoot on the dirt, the air thick with the smell of scorched plastic. When he ducked beneath the truck to inspect the undercarriage, there was nothing, just dirt, axles, rust. But etched into the oil pan with something like a knife were 3 words: remember the circle. Jake backed away, breath catching in his throat. It wasn't possible. The truck had never been left alone since he got here, and yet the writing was there, fresh and ragged, like carved by a hand that didn't care for precision, just intent. He stumbled back to the house, now certain something was happening far beyond his comprehension. Earl was already up, sitting on the front porch, carving a piece of wood with a small buck knife. He didn't look up. "You're seeing them, aren't you?" Earl asked, voice flat. Jake didn't respond at first. "What do you mean, the Watchers? The ones that come at night? They're getting curious about you. First they haunt your sleep, then they leave you messages. Next they'll start asking for pieces." "Pieces?" Jake echoed. Earl tapped his temple. "Memory, time, blood. Doesn't matter, as long as they get something." Jake sat down next to the old man, watching as he whittled the block into a crude figure. It was a man, head missing, arms outstretched. "What is that?" Jake asked. Earl paused, looking at the carving. "It's called the Hollow Shepherd. Used to be a warning. Now he's a promise." "A promise of what?" "That no one leaves this road clean. Everyone leaves something behind. Or stays." Jake leaned forward. "Earl, what's going on out here? What happened to that trucker a year ago? The one they never found?" Earl stopped carving. "He took the wrong off-ramp, like you did." "I didn't." "You did. Same as him. The sign's always been there, only certain eyes see it." Jake remembered the crooked sign in the trees, the way it seemed to shimmer in the headlights. It hadn't looked new, but neither had it looked old. "Just wrong," Earl continued. "That off-ramp leads to County Route 311. Locals call it Dead Loop. Road's not on maps, not anymore. Not since the Red Sun Massacre back in '68. Jake turned toward him. "Massacre? They burned a chapel down to the bones. Said the congregation went mad. Started speaking in languages no one had heard, carving sigils into the pews, sacrificing animals in the basement. One sheriff tried to raid the place, found the preacher hanged upside down over the altar, smiling. Said the fire started itself." Jake shivered. "And now? The road loops. That's what it does. You leave, you come back, unless you feed it." Jake didn't speak for a long time. Eventually, Earl handed him the little wooden effigy. "Keep it on you, might confuse them a while." Jake took it hesitantly. It was heavier than it looked. The base had a faint symbol scorched into it, 3 interlocking crescents. "What does this mean?" Jake asked. Earl looked away. "That's the sigil of St. Caspar's Hollow, the cult that built the chapel. They believed suffering was the only true light, that the road could strip you down until only the soul remained." Jake turned the carving over in his palm. "And if you don't believe in any of that?" Earl finally met his gaze. "Then you're meat." Later that morning, Jake returned to his truck. The carvings were gone. The undercarriage was clean. He drove back out to the main road, trying to test Earl's theory. At the first intersection, he turned right. The air seemed colder. The same barn with the half-burned silo passed him on the right. He drove faster, heart pounding. 2 minutes later, it passed again. Same scorch marks, same collapsed beam. "No," Jake muttered. "No, no, no." He slammed the brakes, got out, walked to the barn. The air smelled like ash. Inside, the walls were covered in blackened symbols. Old blood stained the floorboards in circles. He turned back to the truck, but it wasn't there. Instead, a different vehicle sat on the road now. A rusted semi, engine humming despite no one behind the wheel. Jake ran back. No sign of his own truck. The semi-cab door creaked open, and from inside, something stepped out. It was wearing a driver's uniform, but the face was blurred, not hidden, just undefined, like a bad photograph in motion. Its hands were wrong, too long, fingers tapering into points. "Jake Navarro," it whispered, though the mouth didn't move. "The road remembers." Jake backed away, but behind him now were voices, laughter like a crowd at a sermon. When he spun around, the barn was gone, replaced by rows of pews facing an altar made of teeth. Then the sound of a horn. His truck, blaring from the distance, he ran toward it. But each step felt heavier, like wading through oil. The last thing he saw before collapsing was the hollow shepherd, standing in the road, arms wide, and smiling. Jake froze as the roar faded into silence. The desert around him had grown deathly still, unnaturally still. Even the wind that had screamed through the crevices earlier now refused to stir. Only the pulse in his ears remained, a drumming reminder that he was alive, barely. He crouched beside the truck, heart hammering, eyes scanning the barren landscape for any sign of movement. But there was nothing. No headlights, no animals, not even a dust devil, just the eerie glow of the moon reflecting off the chrome of the Peterbilt and the dark stain soaking into the dry earth where he had seen something. Someone? Dragged away. Jake pushed himself to his feet and moved toward the passenger door. He tried the handle, locked. He cursed under his breath, reached into his pocket, and pulled out the spare. As the door creaked open, he was greeted by the familiar scent of grease, sweat, and the faint vanilla air freshener his daughter had forced him to hang from the mirror. But something was off. The cab was colder than it should have been. He slid in, locked the doors behind him, and reached for the CB radio. "Breaker 19, this is Navarro. Anyone on I-80 westbound, mile marker 146, come back." Static. He tried again, this time flipping through channels. "Anyone copy? I've got a situation here. Possible accident, unknown presence." A sharp burst of feedback made him wince. Then, through the hiss, a voice crackled. "You saw it too." Jake froze. "Who is this?" he barked, grabbing the mic tighter. Silence. Then, "It's not dead, it just waits." Jake dropped the mic as a thud struck the side of the cab. He spun around. The window to his right fogged slightly, as if something or someone was breathing just outside. He reached for his flashlight, flipped it on, and aimed it out the window. Nothing. The fog dissipated in seconds. Shaking, he shoved the truck into gear and pulled back onto the highway, tires spinning briefly on the sand before catching traction. The highway was deserted in both directions. He drove without music, without the CB, without distraction. Every so often he glanced into the mirror, half expecting to see the figure again, the one with the twisted grin and vacant eyes. At 3:07 a.m., the GPS flickered. Then it restarted. He tapped the screen. It displayed something that made his stomach drop. Estimated arrival, 3:13 a.m. That time again. The same time that had been on the mutilated watch of the man in the shack. He hit the brakes. The Peterbilt skidded slightly before settling. Jake sat still, gripping the wheel. He didn't believe in ghosts, or omens, or rituals. But this wasn't coincidence anymore. He scrolled through the dashcam footage, trying to confirm what he saw earlier. The footage was wrong. At first, it played normally. His truck pulling into the gravel shoulder, stepping out, walking toward the shack. But then, a jump cut. He was already inside. The door was closing behind him. Except he never remembered reaching it. Jake squinted. Inside the footage, he appeared to turn, as if noticing something, but the angle of the cam was off now, almost like it was being filmed from inside the shack. He saw himself look directly at the camera and smile. His own face, but not his eyes. They were white, empty, then static. He shut the screen off, breathing hard. A sign appeared in the distance. White metal, rust at the edges. He slowed to read it. Raven's Peak. Mine's 6 miles. The name struck him. Familiar. He didn't know why. Then it hit him. It was mentioned in the old newspaper clipping he'd seen years ago in a truck stop diner near Laramie, about an unincorporated township that disappeared in the 1980s. According to the article, Raven's Peak was evacuated after a chemical spill, but locals whispered of strange disappearances, of families vanishing overnight, of a fire that left no ashes. No one had lived there since. He didn't want to go, but he couldn't not go. As if guided by a force just out of reach, he turned off the highway onto the narrow, cracked road leading to Raven's Peak. The road snaked through dying trees, their bark blackened and brittle. Jake noticed small bundles hanging from the branches, cloth dolls, straw figures, bones tied with red twine. The deeper he drove, the more frequent they became. A wooden sign greeted him at the town's edge. "Welcome to Raven's Peak, where the past never dies." Half the letters were faded. The words beneath had been scratched out. He passed the remains of a general store, its windows shattered and shelves overturned. A school bus sat rusting on the side of the road, its front windshield painted black from the inside. Strange symbols, sharp-edged, symmetrical, were drawn across the hood in what looked like dried blood. Jake parked in front of the church. It was the only building still standing. The bell tower loomed above, its cross broken, hanging sideways like a snapped neck. He stepped out, the night air heavier now. The church doors were ajar. A flicker of candlelight glowed within. He approached, footsteps loud against the wooden steps. As he pushed the doors open, the air inside seemed to inhale round him, thick with incense and rot. The pews were intact, but aged. On each bench sat a wooden effigy, faceless, dressed in black burlap. At the pulpit stood a man, or what looked like one. Tall, thin, with skin like parchment and eyes closed as if in silent prayer. Jake didn't move. Then the figure spoke. "You came late." Its voice was like wind through a dry well. Jake took a step back. "You were marked the moment you left that woman on the roadside. The ritual needs a guide. The blood already spilled was not hers alone." Jake's stomach twisted. "What the hell are you talking about?" The figure opened its eyes. They were pure white. Jake turned and ran, the candlelight behind him flaring suddenly bright. He didn't look back until he was in the truck, engine roaring to life. As he reversed, a dozen figures emerged from the darkened buildings, all dressed in burlap, faces hidden, each one holding a wooden staff carved with the same twisted symbols. He drove hard, didn't stop until the road spit him back onto I-80. His GPS blinked once, then again, then reset, rerouting. Estimated arrival, 3:13 a.m. Jake didn't remember leaving the truck. One minute he was staring at the GPS, watching it blink 3:13 a.m. like a cursed heartbeat. The next, he was standing barefoot in the middle of a wheat field, the stalks rising to his waist, brushing against his arms like reaching fingers. The moonlight was gone. The sky above him was a colorless sheet. No stars, no wind, no sound. He turned slowly, trying to get his bearings, but every direction looked the same. Row after row of dry, silver-tinted wheat. And then came the sound. A deep, resonant creaking, like an old wooden gate swinging open somewhere behind him. He spun. A scarecrow stood in the field 30 feet away, though he swore it hadn't been there before. Its arms were outstretched, head slumped forward, hat missing. Burlap skin, twisted wire fingers, and something dark oozing down its side. Jake took a cautious step backward, then another. The scarecrow's head twitched. He ran. The field blurred around him, wheat slicing across his cheeks, arms pumping. But the faster he ran, the closer he felt the thing behind him. Not footsteps, not breathing, just the sensation of being watched by something that shouldn't see. And then, another creak. He stopped. Ahead of him, another scarecrow. Then another, to the left. And another, just over his right shoulder, far too close. He was surrounded. Jake Navarro, a voice whispered from the darkness. It was dry, hushed, as if spoken through a mouth full of dust. You were meant to deliver it, but you interfered. Jake's knees buckled. The wheat around him shifted. No wind, no motion, but they parted all the same, making way for someone. It was the woman. The same woman he had picked up on the road, hours or lifetimes ago, only now her face was wrong, stretched. Her eyes were deep black sockets, and her smile carved wider than a human mouth should stretch. She wore the same torn flannel, but it hung like burial cloth now, soaked through at the hem with something black and sticky. She approached, barefoot and silent, leaving no trail in the dirt. Jake tried to speak, but no sound came. The woman tilted her head. "You stole the relic," she said, her voice now hers and not hers, layered as though two beings spoke through the same mouth. "You moved it from the freight. You broke the route. And now," her hand rose. Behind her, the scarecrows lifted their heads in unison. "The curse resets." Jake stumbled back, but his heel caught something soft. He turned. It was the duffel bag. The one from the truck bed, the one he didn't remember packing. It lay open now, and inside, resting atop a bloody cloth, was a black stone object shaped like a heart. Not a symbol, not a carving, an actual heart. It pulsed once. Jake screamed and kicked the bag away, but it didn't move. "Finish the route," the woman hissed. "Deliver the blood, or Raven's Peak will rise again." Then she vanished. The field evaporated. Jake sat bolt upright in the cab of his truck, drenched in sweat. It was still dark. The dashboard clock read 3:13 a.m., but he was no longer on the road. He was parked in front of a long-abandoned diner, its neon sign broken, but still buzzing faintly. Red Pins Cafe, open 24 hours. He recognized the name. He had eaten there with a fellow trucker once, 5 years ago, before it closed for good after a kitchen fire. The place had been condemned, so why was it glowing now? Jake got out, legs shaking, and stepped onto the gravel lot. The sky was still wrong. No stars, no wind, no horizon. He reached for his phone, but it was dead. Not low battery, just dead. He glanced at the back of the truck. The latch on the freight container was open, not wide, just slightly ajar, as if inviting inspection. With a heavy breath, he stepped up and opened it fully. The inside was pitch black. Not empty, just black. He turned his flashlight on and aimed it inside. The light didn't penetrate the darkness. Then came the whisper. "You are the last of the route, Jake Navarro." He slammed the container shut, latched it, and backed away. The diner lights flickered. He had to know what was going on, had to find answers. Maybe someone, anyone, inside. He entered the diner. The air inside was warm, buzzing with the scent of bacon grease and old coffee. The booths were occupied, not by people, but by wax mannequins dressed in trucker caps, flannel shirts, and overalls. Their faces were featureless. Their hands rested around empty mugs, as if caught mid-sip. At the counter stood a woman. She looked real. Too real. Dark red lipstick, hair tied back, apron clean. A name tag read Miriam. She smiled. "Morning, Jake. Table for one?" He blinked. "How do you know my name?" She poured coffee into a cracked mug and set it on the counter. "You've always come here. Every time the cycle reaches this point." Jake didn't sit. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You're carrying the black heart," Miriam said, calmly. "You were marked when your blood hit the gravel outside Claremont. You were chosen to finish the delivery, same as your father." "Same as your father?" Jake's stomach turned. "My father was a steel worker." Miriam smiled softly. "No, he told you that to protect you, but he was a driver. Long haul. Route 79. Same container, same hour." Jake staggered back. "It's not just a freight, Jake. It's a vessel. And you broke the chain. Now the rules are unraveling." A deep rumble shook the diner. The mannequins turned their heads. Miriam looked toward the windows. "They're almost here." Jake ran out, ignoring her call. As he reached the truck, he saw something rising from the hills behind the diner. Tall, thin, human-shaped but wrong. Legs that bent the wrong way, arms too long. Heads crowned with bone. Dozens of them. He climbed into the cab and started the engine. The GPS blinked to life. New route calculated. Destination, the last mile. Eats Little 13. IMHA. He drove, tires screaming, night collapsing behind him like a wave. The highway had changed. Jake could feel it. Not just in the way the pavement seemed to hum under his tires, but in how the mile markers were gone, replaced with tall wooden poles wrapped in dried vines, like skeletal sentinels watching him pass. The GPS, though glowing, gave no roads, just a message at the bottom: keep driving, do not exit. The cab was cold, too cold. His breath misted the windshield even though he'd cranked the heat. The heart, the black relic, throbbed faintly in the duffel bag beside him, as if beating in sync with the road. He hadn't touched it since Raven's Peak, but he could feel its presence, whispering in moments when his thoughts wandered. And lately, his thoughts wandered often. A sign appeared ahead, half rotted and held together by rusted nails. Painted in faded red letters, "Welcome to Drown's Crossing, where the past never stays buried." Jake shivered. The truck's lights flickered. Then the engine sputtered. No, not now," he muttered, slapping the dash. The RPM dropped. The rig coasted. He barely managed to veer it onto a gravel pull-off before it died completely. Silence. He waited for the familiar click of the engine trying to breathe again. Nothing. Just the distant chirp of insects that didn't sound quite right. Too sharp, like razors rubbing together. He stepped out. The town was ahead. Barely more than a collection of collapsing homes, their windows blackened, their porches sagging. A church steeple leaned left, like it had been punched in the face of God. Jake slung the duffel over his shoulder. He didn't want to carry it, but some part of him knew better than to leave it behind. There were rules now. Unspoken, but absolute. Something would find it, if he didn't. The road into Drown's Crossing was cracked and weed-choked. On either side, rows of mailboxes sat open, their contents long gone. Wind whistled through the eaves of houses like voices trapped in old attics. And then, music. Soft, warbled, a phonograph. It drifted from the chapel ahead. Jake approached carefully, boots crunching gravel. The church door hung open, a thin golden light spilling onto the steps. Inside, the pews were empty, but every seat held a shadow. Figures made of smoke, seated reverently, unmoving. At the pulpit stood a man in a funeral suit, face hidden behind a burlap mask stitched with a crooked smile. "Welcome, Jake," the figure said, voice echoing though his lips never moved. "You're right on time." Jake didn't reply. "You carry the heart," the figure continued. "Good. We've been waiting." "For what?" Jake asked. The figure stepped down. With each footfall, the floorboards moaned like they were in pain. "To finish what your father couldn't." Jake's hands clenched. "My father didn't know any of this. He died in an accident." "He died screaming, trying to seal the relic back inside the hollow," the masked man corrected. "You remember him wrong. They always make sure you do." Jake's mind reeled. The duffel felt heavier. The man gestured to the altar where a small box sat, a pine casket no larger than a shoebox. Runes were etched along its side, bleeding crimson. "You must place it here, as your bloodline has done for 7 generations." Jake didn't move. "You said the root was broken," he said, "that I reset the curse. Why would this work?" The man chuckled beneath the burlap. "It won't, but it will delay the rising. The black heart must sleep, and you, Jake, are its cradle." From behind the pews, the shadows stood. Dozens of them. They moved without sound, encircling him, heads bowed. Jake stepped back. "I'm not part of this." "You are," the man said. "You always were." Jake dropped the bag on the floor. "I want out." "You can't leave a story you were born into," the man whispered. "But you can write its next page." The windows exploded. Wind rushed in, black wind, laced with ash and whispers. The shadows were sucked upward like paper in a firestorm, and the masked figure's head twisted violently before vanishing in a flash of light. Jake stumbled out of the chapel into chaos. The town was alive. The ground writhed. Trees bent backwards. Smoke poured from the earth in thick spirals, taking the shape of mouths that screamed without sound. Buildings bled. Mailboxes snapped open and shut like jaws, and at the center of the street a hole had opened. Perfectly round. Blacker than night, something was crawling out of it. Tall, bent, a ribcage exposed like broken letters. No face, just a vertical mouth that stretched from forehead to chest. Jake ran. He didn't remember getting back to the truck. Didn't remember the engine starting or the road appearing beneath him. 1 second he was in hell, and the next he was speeding down a straight stretch of empty highway. The bag lay silent beside him. The GPS blinked. Next stop, the branching stone. ETA 3:13 a.m. Jake didn't know how much longer he could take this. He was unraveling. Each place pulled more of him away. Each encounter took another memory, another piece of who he thought he was. And yet, some part of him felt clearer. Like the truth had always been here, just buried beneath the weight of a lie he never agreed to. In the rear view, the road behind him burned. A column of smoke rose where Drown's Crossing used to be. He didn't look back again. As the horizon began to shift, no sunrise, only the bleeding of stars, Jake realized something. He no longer remembered what he was hauling, only that it wanted to arrive, and he was the only one left who could stop it, or let it in. Jake didn't remember falling asleep. All he knew was that when he opened his eyes, he was already pulling off Highway 117 onto a dirt path that hadn't been on any map, certainly not on the GPS, which was now frozen on a blank screen that only displayed 3 words: the branching stone. The early light of dawn was wrong. It didn't warm the sky, that only bled it into shades of bruised violet and dirty rust, stretching over an empty plain where nothing grew except dead corn stalks and crooked scarecrows with no heads. The truck's tires crunched over gravel that sounded too much like broken teeth. Ahead, nestled in a depression of land like a wound, was the stone. It rose 10 feet tall, wider at the base, covered in primitive carvings like fingers reaching toward the heavens. It had the hue of old bones, cracked and weeping with sap that looked like tar. Around it, dozens of wooden posts were planted in uneven rings, each with something tied to it. Children's shoes, animal skulls, fragments of mirrors, license plates. Some newer than Jake was comfortable seeing. The engine choked and stopped. Jake didn't even bother trying to start it again. He already knew it wouldn't. The air here didn't move. There was no wind, no insects, no scent. Only weight. He stepped out and slung the duffel bag over his shoulder again. The heart was still pulsing. Slower now, but deeper, like it knew it was close to something. Jake tightened the zipper. "I don't want this," he whispered to no one, to nothing. But something heard him. A figure sat at the base of the stone. At first Jake thought it was a scarecrow. Straw poked from the sleeves of a flannel shirt, and a burlap sack covered its face, stitched with a smile too wide, too human. But the thing moved. Slowly, deliberately, its hand lifting to point at Jake, then at the stone. Jake took a step back. "What is this place?" he asked. The figure didn't speak, but Jake heard the answer anyway. Inside his head, like a memory he never lived. "This is where the road was broken, where your bloodline faltered, where it escaped." He clutched the bag tighter. "The heart? Yes, but it was never a heart. It was always an eye, an invitation." Jake's stomach twisted. "Then why give it to me? Why drag me through all this?" The figure stood. Its arms were too long, sleeves hanging like dead skin. It walked toward him with an uneven gait, like each step was a prayer recited backwards. "Because your father failed, because he chose mercy, because he tried to bury it instead of completing the severing." Severing? The ritual of endings. You think the road ends at the stone. It doesn't. It never has. Jake's voice cracked. I want to leave. I want this done. Then do it. But know this. The one who severs must feed it. Feed it what? Blood. Willing. Kin. Jake staggered back. No, but the figure was already gone. The sky overhead began to split, subtle at first, like the peeling of wallpaper revealing a darker layer underneath. The clouds unraveled into spirals. The earth around the stone pulsed with heatless tremors. From the corners of the field came a sound Jake would never forget. Not a howl, not a scream, but something in between, rising and falling like waves of grief. A procession. They emerged from the field, children with hollow eyes, old men with wire for teeth, women carrying jars filled with floating tongues, all of them barefoot, all of them smiling. They gathered around the stone, none of them spoke. They simply waited, and Jake understood. This was the cost. He unslung the bag, placed it at the base of the stone. The procession backed away. The duffel moved on its own. The zipper slid down. The eye floated upward, suspended by nothing. It pulsed once, then opened. A single vertical slit filled with stars stared at Jake. And then the visions came. His father, kneeling at the stone, blood pouring from his eyes. A child screaming inside the cab of a truck, windows fogged by frantic breath. A woman in white walking backward into a flame that didn't burn. His own hands, digging a grave while something inside him laughed. Jake screamed. When he opened his eyes, he was standing at the edge of the stone with a knife in his hand. A rusted thing, old as the earth. His palm was cut. Blood dripped onto the stone, hissing as it touched. The eye stared. One more. Jake looked up. Among the crowd, someone stepped forward. It was Robert. The man Jake thought was long dead. His father's old partner, the one who disappeared on a route to Utah. His eyes were hollow, his mouth hung open, but he moved with purpose, and in his hand was a mirror. He held it to Jake's face. The reflection didn't match. Jake saw himself. Older, skin marked with black veins, his own eyes starting to glow. He was changing. The ritual had already begun. No, Jake said, I won't finish this. The eye throbbed, the crowd whispered, the ground buckled, and from behind the stone another figure emerged. Her, the woman from his dream, the girl in the photos, the mother he never remembered. She was real, alive, or close enough. She spoke only once. It's the only way to stop it. Jake, you have to become the road. Then she fell forward into the stone, vanishing without a sound. The eye closed. The stone cracked. Jake fell to his knees. The crowd dispersed like smoke. The field was empty, and behind him, the truck's engine roared to life. The GPS flickered on. Last stop, red pins. Jake rose. There was only one chapter left, and it would end where it all began. The drive to Red Pines felt like slipping into a memory Jake never lived. The world outside the windows lost definition. Trees without leaves, towns without names, people without faces. Each mile was a step deeper into a story that had written him, long before he'd taken his first breath. The GPS no longer gave directions. It simply displayed a countdown. Not distance, not time, just one. Then the screen went black. He pulled into the town just as twilight bled into night. Red Pines was smaller than he imagined, not a proper town, more like a leftover place, a gas station with no attendants, a post office with a sagging roof, rows of houses with lights on but no shadows moving behind the curtains. There were no cars, no people, just the hum of street lamps that flickered in unison, like something breathing. Jake parked in front of the church. The same church from the photograph, a clapboard structure with rotting stairs, its steeple leaning slightly left, as if it too was tired of standing watch. He stepped out, bag in hand. Heart still pulsing, the doors were open. Inside, candles lit themselves, the pews were filled, but not with people. They were filled with echoes, outlines of townsfolk long gone, shimmering figures that seemed to flicker between moments. Jake saw a man holding a Bible, his mouth frozen mid-sermon. A child kneeling to pray, her hands clasped around nothing. An old woman whose body blurred at the edges, as if she were half erased. And at the altar stood a man in robes. His face was wrong, too smooth, too symmetrical, as if carved from wax. But his voice, when it came, was familiar. "Welcome home, Jacob." Jake's mouth went dry. "Who are you?" "I am the final voice, the steward of your bloodline, the one who kept the path hidden until it was time to walk it again." "What is this place?" "A sanctuary once, then a prison, now an altar." The figure extended an arm. Behind the altar, the floor split open, revealing a staircase that spiraled down into darkness. "You have brought the eye and the blood. The final gate awaits." Jake shook his head. "I didn't agree to this. But you came, didn't you? You saw the stone. You fed it your lineage. The bargain is already sealed. All that remains is your choice of how it ends." The congregation began to hum. Low at first, then louder, voices without mouths. A hymn in reverse. Jake descended. The stairs led into an underground room carved from stone, ancient and wet with rot. Symbols covered the walls, some in chalk, others in blood. At the center was a stone table, stained and cracked, surrounded by 6 empty chairs. Each chair bore a name: Navarro, Smith, Gerard, Lane, Hayes, Childress. Jake traced the first name, his own, and found it fresh, etched in red. "You are the last of the 6, the wax-faced man whispered behind him. "The others failed. Their lines broke, but yours endured. You were chosen because you were forgotten. A branch that escaped pruning, a seed that grew in the dark." Jake's hands trembled. "What happens if I refuse?" "Then the road begins again. The curse spreads. Another cycle, another generation swallowed by the eye. And if I agree, you sever it. You end what your father could not. But to do so, you must anchor the ritual. You must become the 7th. Jake turned. "The 7th what?" "The 7th chair, the witness, the sacrifice, the memory." Above them, the church bells rang, though there was no wind to move them. The wax-faced man vanished. Jake stood alone. The eye burst from the bag, hovering above the table. It pulsed rapidly now, no longer hiding its hunger. The visions returned. He saw the roads stretching endlessly, not made of asphalt but of bones. Skulls lining the shoulders like mile markers. He saw himself digging, always digging, but the hole only got deeper, until it opened into a pit where the past screamed. He saw his father, young, afraid, dragging a crying child across this very floor. A ritual interrupted, choice unmade. The child was Jake. Jake stumbled backward. "I'm not him. I'm not my father." But the eye whispered, "You are all of them." The walls of the chamber began to bleed. Jake dropped to his knees, and then he heard it. A voice. Real. Human. "Jake?" He turned. In the doorway stood Emery, alive, bruised, dirty, but alive. "I followed you," she said, her voice cracking. "Something told me you needed someone to pull you back." Jake stood. "You don't understand. I have to finish it." Emery stepped closer. "Then let me finish it with you." The eye screeched. Candles exploded in gouts of smoke. The chairs caught fire, one by one, their names burned away. The eye shrank, panicked. Jake looked at Emery, and for the first time in days he smiled. "You found me." "You were never lost," she said, "just forgotten." Jake reached into his pocket, pulled out the mirror Robert had shown him, held it up to the eye. The eye flinched. It saw itself, saw what it had become, greedy, endless, blind, and it screamed. Jake threw the mirror. The eye shattered. Light poured from its wound. Not warm, not cold, just real. The chamber shook, the ceiling cracked, and then silence. When Jake opened his eyes again, he was lying in the grass outside the church. The morning sun was rising. Red Pines was gone. No buildings, no roads, just a field with a single stone in the center. Emery was beside him, holding his hand. The bag was empty. The heart was gone. No eye, no ritual, no road, just them. Jake looked up. Above, a single crow circled once, then vanished into the light. He whispered, "It's over." But far away, down some other forgotten road, a child's voice laughed. And somewhere, something opened its eye again. The hospital in Abingdon didn't have a proper name. Locals just called it the Ridge. It sat high above the town, abandoned for nearly 40 years, a rotting skeleton of red brick and steel, wrapped in overgrown ivy and silence. Jake stared at it from the passenger seat, his hands still bandaged, the pain in his chest a phantom echo of what had happened in Red Pines. They had driven all night. Emery hadn't said much, just kept her hand on the wheel and her eyes on the broken road. Now, in the early gray of dawn, the car sat still while Jake gathered the courage to speak. "They said my grandfather died in this place," he finally muttered. "But I never found a record, just rumors." Emery shut off the engine. "Then it's time to see for yourself." They stepped into the brittle air, boots crunching on frost-covered gravel. Jake's breath misted in front of him like cigarette smoke. Something about the place felt wrong. Not haunted, not cursed, but hollowed out, like a body without a soul. The main door was chained shut. Emery pulled out bolt cutters she'd borrowed from the garage in Bristol. They snapped the rusted links with a scream that echoed up the ridge. Inside, the air was thick with mold and a chemical sweetness that clung to the back of the throat. Broken wheelchairs lined the hall, cracks spidered across the tiled floors. Every few steps, Jake saw scraps of medical forms, ancient Polaroids curled by time, or children's drawings, some of them depicting impossible things. Giant eyes in the sky, people with hands growing from their faces, shadowy figures feeding on trees. They walked past the admissions desk, through the long corridor of Ward B until they found the elevator shaft. Doors permanently open, cables long since snapped. A map of the facility, half burned, showed a sub-basement. Record storage restricted. Of course it was. They found the stairwell, descended into the dark. The deeper they went, the more the air grew wet and warm, as if the building had lungs and they were walking into its throat. Finally, the stairs ended at a rusted steel door, etched with the hospital's forgotten crest, an eye with 7 teardrops beneath it. Jake reached out. The handle turned. The room beyond was impossibly large. Walls of file cabinets stretched upward beyond the light of their flashlights. In the center stood a single desk, and behind it, an old man. He wore a white coat. His face was lined like the folds of an ancient map. His eyes gleamed like glass marbles. "You made it," he rasped. "I was beginning to wonder if the ritual had failed again." Jake's throat went dry. "Who are you?" "I'm the archivist, the memory keeper, the one who writes down the things that must never be spoken." The man gestured to the cabinets. "These are the lost records. Every name forgotten, every curse repeated, every child who screamed and was never heard." Jake took a step forward. "My grandfather, Samuel Navarro, was he here?" The archivist's smile was thin. "He was the first." He pulled open a drawer. From within, he retrieved a thin black folder with the Navarro seal. Inside, a photograph of a young man strapped to a gurney, screaming. A note, handwritten in red ink. Subject failed to contain the breach. Contamination level irreversible. Memory thread severed. Rebirth pending. Jake's hands trembled. "I don't understand," he said. The archivist nodded solemnly. "Because you were never meant to. Understanding breaks the cycle. You are not here to learn. You are here to finish what your bloodline began." Behind them, The room darkened. Cabinets groaned. Whispers bled from every crack in the walls. Emery grabbed Jake's arm. "We shouldn't be here." But the floor beneath them shifted, groaned, then collapsed. They fell. Into cold, into fire, into something else. Jake awoke in a room made of mirrors. Not glass, not reflections, but memories. Each surface showed a different version of him. In one, he was a child hiding under the porch. In another, a teenager lighting a candle in a circle of salt. In another, older, broken, kneeling before a monstrous eye carved into stone. The mirrors spoke, not in words, but in thoughts, echoing from behind his ribs. "You are not one man. You are the vessel. You are not the end. You are the bridge. You are not the hero. You are the story." Then, silence. Jake stood. The mirror room cracked like an egg, and he was back. Not in the archive, not in the hospital, but on the road again, standing in the center of a 2-lane highway. Deserted. Endless. The sky above him was violet. The moon hung low, pulsing like a wound. To his left, red pines. To his right, the ridge. And in front of him, a new town, one he'd never seen, but it knew his name. Emery stepped out beside him. "What is this?" she asked. Jake didn't answer. He knew. The road wasn't a place. It was a pathway. A ritual in motion, spanning generations. What had happened in Red Pines wasn't the end. It was just the unlocking. Somewhere down this new road, another town waited. Another eye. Another child would be born. Marked. Another Navarro would bleed. Jake clenched his fists, but this time, he wouldn't run. He turned toward the town ahead and stepped forward. Jake had always thought the end would be louder, something full of screams and fire and teeth. Instead, it was eerily quiet. The town he and Emery walked into had no name on the welcome sign, just 2 words carved in weathered wood: "Stay awake." Everything about the place felt off, not cursed but rehearsed. The mailboxes had no flags. The storefronts displayed no prices. Windows were lit, but no one ever opened a door. Emery leaned close to Jake and whispered, "We've been here before." He wanted to say no, but she was right. The layout was wrong, yet familiar. The pharmacy on the corner, the diner that never changed its menu, the church with the missing bell, all of them like faded dreams wearing new skin. They walked until they saw it, a 2-story white house with black shutters and a red door. Jake's breath caught. This was the house from his grandfather's journals, the one Samuel had drawn again and again, always with the phrase scrawled underneath, "Where they keep the echo." The door opened without a sound. The inside smelled like burnt cedar and lavender. A staircase curled upward like a spine. Mirrors lined the hallway, but they didn't show reflections, only memories. His, Amory's. People they'd never met but somehow recognized. A child standing in a circle of salt. A man burying a book beneath a porch. A woman screaming into a well. Each image burned into the wall, then faded. In the living room, a fire burned in the hearth, though no one had lit it. Above it hung a painting, not of the house, but of an eye. 7 teardrops below it. Always 7. Jake reached for Emery's hand, but she was already walking toward the basement door. "Emery?" "They're waiting," she said softly, then descended. Jake followed. The stairs creaked but didn't collapse. The air grew denser. At the bottom, they entered a space that didn't belong beneath any house. It was stone, circular, ancient. Candles flickered in glass bowls. In the center stood a table with a mirror embedded into it, and surrounding the mirror were carvings. Jake leaned in. The carvings were names, his father's, his grandfather's, even his own, all etched in spirals toward the center, where one final name waited to be carved. Helena Navarro. "No," Jake breathed. "She's just a child. She's not part of this." From the shadows, a voice answered, not loud, not angry, just certain. She already was. A woman stepped forward, pale skin, dark eyes. She wore a veil and a black dress stitched with red thread. Her voice was heavy with gravity, like a bell that had been rung 1,000 times. You think you've been undoing the ritual, but you've been completing it. Every step, every refusal, every time you bled, it brought us closer. Jake backed away. No, I buried the books. I broke the seal at Red Pines. I destroyed the mirror in the ridge. You fed the pattern, the woman said. You gave it memory, blood, witness. That is how it survives. Emery stepped between them. Then we destroy this place. Burn it all. The woman didn't flinch. She simply raised one hand, and the room answered. The walls screamed. The candles went black, and Jake felt himself yanked backward through time, through thought, through identity. He saw his grandfather on the gurney, his father in the chapel, himself in the woods. Then Helena, standing before the mirror, her eyes wide, reaching out. Jake snapped back to the room, gasping. The woman was gone. Emery was holding him. She showed me everything, he said. Emery nodded. She was never a person. She is the ritual, the memory itself. Jake looked at the mirror on the table. The carving swirled around it like a drain. What happens if I break it? Emery didn't answer. Jake took a breath, then lifted the iron candle holder beside him and brought it down hard. The mirror shattered. The carvings bled, and the world tilted. Jake woke up in his own bed, sunlight through the blinds, the clock ticking normally. He sat up slowly, half expecting the world to unravel again, but it didn't. Everything was fine. He walked downstairs. The TV was playing a news segment, local weather. No mentions of Red Pines or missing towns or hospital fires. In the kitchen, a photo sat on the counter. Him, Emery, and a girl, 8, maybe 9 years old, Helena. He didn't remember taking it, didn't remember raising her, but he remembered loving her. His phone buzzed. A text from Emery. She's waiting outside, first day of school. Jake walked to the front door, opened it, and there she was. Backpack slung over one shoulder, grinning like the sun lived inside her. Ready? She asked. Jake hesitated, then nodded. They walked down the driveway together, but as they reached the sidewalk, Jake turned and saw the house again. Only now, above the door, the wood was etched with a new phrase. The mirror may shatter, but the reflection remains. Jake smiled faintly. He didn't know if the ritual was truly broken, if the pattern had died or merely changed shape, but he knew one thing for sure. This time, he remembered. And sometimes, remembering is enough to keep the dark at bay. For now. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this haunting journey. If this story made your heart race, your thoughts spiral, or your light stay on a little longer tonight, you're not alone. We built this world together, layer by layer, shadow by shadow, and every minute you spent listening brought it more vividly to life. Stories like these aren't just about monsters or curses. They're about memory, legacy, and the parts of ourselves we bury or forget. And maybe, just maybe, remembering is the first step to surviving. If you enjoyed this tale, consider subscribing, sharing, and letting us know what stayed with you. Was it the ritual, the mirror, or the echo of a name? Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and whatever you do, don't forget what you saw. Good night, and good luck.